Hey, what's up? This is Udolena from Udolena Digital. Welcome to my channel. Every Sunday I post a new video on my favorite topics like books, courses, education, as well as online marketing and advertising. I work for Google, but everything that I share here is my own personal opinion. For those of you who are new here, please be sure to subscribe. For the new subscribers, welcome, and please enjoy the channel and explore the rest of the videos. Today I'm going to talk about Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall. Why this book? This book is something that I read a few years ago when Europe and especially the UK and France were torn from several really bad terrorist attacks, and everybody was kind of in dismay. What's going on? What's happening? What is this again? Suddenly, like, everybody around you is a little bit confused about what's going on. Why are these people so angry? What did we do to them? And then these books like this one, can help you really understand history, understand the context of the world that you live in, and why things are the way they are. So who is Tim Marshall? The writer of this book, he is a diplomatic editor of Sky News. So he's a British journalist. He was in situ in the wars in the Balkans. He was in situ in wars and conflict zones in the Middle East. And he knows his shit. I read first the part about the Balkans, since I come from the Balkans, and during the 90s there was a severe conflict there in our neighboring countries in Serbia, and the way he described it was making so much sense, and I actually learned a few things that I didn't know about, and I was like, this guy understands history. This is not from the perspective of someone who is just talking about facts. He's from the perspective of someone who's lived through them, who has met the people who live there, and he really understands the history and the context of events. The prism of this book is very interesting. It's about geography. So I think when we went to school, history and geography have always been taught, let's say, with the country that you come from in the center of it. Let's say if you study geography in the UK is the center of the world. If you study geography in Bulgaria, Bulgaria is the center of the world, regardless where you are. Whereas this book is, let's say, the ultimum textbook that you should have actually at school to understand the modern world, what is happening right now and why things are the way they are, as well as combining it with geography. So Prisoners of Geography means that all the countries that we know about, let's say even the biggest powers to the smallest ones, are to some extent influenced by the climate and the geographical position of them on the map. Let's say mountains, deserts, oceans, seaports, frozen wastelands like the North Pole. These are all things that make it or break it in history. And we can look into some examples here. He starts with the example between Russia as one of the biggest examples of a prisoner of geography. So Russia is a huge country, and it is huge because it's very difficult to challenge it. Let's say on the south side it is surrounded by mountains and deserts, which are difficult to cross. On the east side there is a cold Pacific Ocean, let's say the northern part of the hemisphere of the Pacific Ocean, the border with Alaska, with the United States, which is pretty cold and rough. And then you have the North Pole on the north, which makes it pretty much impossible for anyone to attack Russia from the north. And then what's left is the west border. And if you look at history, this was the weakest point of Russia, and this is where all the biggest fights of the history of Russia have happened, with Napoleon, with Hitler. This is where the biggest battlefields were. And you can look into the history of Russia as well in Eastern Europe. This is why Russia has always put so much emphasis on Eastern Europe, is because this is, let's say, their most vulnerable place is from this western border. So they want to have control, they want to have good, let's say, communication with the countries that are on this border, to keep them, let's say, kind of as friends, allies, and to make sure that they don't meet an easy attack from the west side. Also, he talks about why Crimea is so important to Russia. And if you look at actually the geography of Crimea, this is the only place where Russia could possibly have access to a seaport, warm seaport, because they have St. Petersburg on the north, which gets frozen in the winter. They have the Pacific Ocean, which is far away from trading. So the only way for Russia to connect with Europe through water, through the warm Mediterranean Sea, through the Black Sea, where it is possible for them to have trade communications with the rest of Europe, is through Crimea and Ukraine. And this is why, actually, if you look back in history, there has been so many attacks, and Russia has been periodically gaining control and losing over this territory. That's why it has always been important to them. Funny enough, also he mentions countries like China and India. So over thousands of years, these two countries have been always two very powerful empires and powerful countries, huge, with a lot of resources, a lot of people. But how come they never attacked each other? Or kind of they have like very few conflicts. Let's say you don't know about a huge battle between India and China. And the reason is that there is the highest mountain in the world being on their border, the Himalayas. So it's very difficult, it makes it impossible to actually cross this border even with modern technology. And here makes a note that, of course, we are prisoners of geography, but we can change this over time, and we can change our prisons by inventing new technology. Also, he mentions that these prisons and confinements of geography can change themselves with the climate change. As the North Pole, let's say, melts down and Russia gets access to the north, and they have maybe discover new resources or be able to trade, let's say, a full year long when the sea is not freezing in St. Petersburg, they might have different story there. Also, when lands are submerged underwater and nations are displaced because of climate change, this will of course affect politics and will lead to more conflict and huge events happening in the world. Finally, he talks about the fake borders, let's say the borders that were pretty much created by the old colonial powers of the world, the British, the French, and how these borders actually didn't make sense. Because there is no natural border there is no mountain, there is nothing. Let's say it's just like a small hump of sand in the desert. But over millennia, these nations and these tribes have been living together and didn't understand why somehow now they ended up in 3 different countries. And this explains very well some of the conflicts that have happened, let's say, in the Middle East, where a lot of the borders were done by Europeans who had never been in these countries. They just drew it on the map. Same in Africa. Disregarding tribes, disregarding actual connections between people there and the local dynamics, because they've never been there. And this inheritance we are bringing until nowadays, when there's still a lot of conflicts in these regions. Finally, he ends up on a bit of a sad note around the world, that now we are on our way to explore the stars. Let's say we broke from the shackles of gravity, but we are still attacking the space as Chinese, Americans, English, whatever. We are not one humanity. And what he kind of mentions and hints here is that, are we going to continue our confinements and our prisons? Are we going to carry them now in space? Are we going to continue the way we are? Or are we going to act as one humanity? So far, although we have broken free from the shackles of gravity, we are still imprisoned of our own minds, confined by our suspicion of the other, and thus our primal competition for resources. There is a long way to go. I can't agree more, unfortunately. I still think that humanity is pretty much focused on their 1,000-year-old mindsets and beliefs and fears of the other, and is still not at the place where we can act as one. This is why this kind of books are very helpful as an eye-opener to understand actually that there is a logic between all the events that are happening, and to be able to make sense of the world that's around you. Of course, we're not gonna fix this by reading the book, but I think that being informed and educated is one step further. Thanks a lot for watching this video. Please subscribe to this channel, hit the notification button so that you know when I'm posting my next video. Please explore, comment, share if you like this video, and I'll be back with a new video next week.